Keanu Reeves arrived at Riverside Bistro on a damp Oregon evening, slipping through the entrance with a quiet presence that belied his international fame. The steady drizzle outside had given the small restaurant an almost mythical glow, as raindrops tapped gently on fogged windows. Within the warm confines of this unassuming eatery, waitstaff bustled, families chatted over their end-of-week dinners, and the fragrant combination of freshly baked bread and roasted garlic permeated the soft, candle-lit ambience. At first glance, there was no sign that this damp-haired visitor, wearing a simple black sweater and slightly worn jeans, was anything more than an ordinary patron. He seemed humble, even introspective, as he paused near the entrance to survey the scene. A few people seated by the main walkway cast glances in his direction, suspecting they had seen his face before. Most, however, remained unaware that a celebrated actor was standing just a few steps away. This isn't just a story, it's a revelation. And if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe now before it disappears. Riverside Bistro was a cozy, family-run spot, popular among locals, and an occasional stop for travelers driving through the region. Its reputation rested on a relaxed atmosphere and generous portions of homemade comfort food. With its wooden beams, soft lighting, and a scattering of photographs showing the town's history, it offered an unpretentious welcome to anyone seeking a filling meal. The staff took pride in memorizing the regulars' preferences, and it was common for them to greet longtime customers with the familiarity of old friends. On that specific night, however, the restaurant was unusually crowded. The hostess, a young woman accustomed to juggling tight reservation schedules, was in the midst of directing walk-ins toward the waiting area. Because of the high volume of patrons, her patience ran thin. She barely glanced at the newcomer as she rustled through a list of expected guests. She regarded him more like a wandering passerby and less like an A-list celebrity. She found only a single opening, a small table tucked near the rear of the dining area, and gestured for him to wait. Her polite smile appeared forced and fleeting, conveyed more out of duty than genuine warmth. In the slight pause that followed, Keanu remained tranquil, absorbing the inviting mix of old wood and hushed chatter. Perhaps he felt a temporary liberation in being treated as a regular person, though the twinkle in his eyes hinted that he was fully prepared for when recognition inevitably struck. A few steps away, behind a narrow serving station, a waiter named Ethan Carter was busy with a meticulously arranged tray. Ethan was in his late 20s and had worked at Riverside Bistro for half a decade, though more out of necessity than enthusiasm. He was known among the staff for his sharp ability to handle orders, but also for periodic bouts of irritability. Long shifts, financial pressures, and dreams that felt forever on hold contributed to his prickly demeanor. When the hostess signaled that a single guest needed a seat, Ethan pursed his lips. He turned to see the lone figure waiting near the coat rack. The guest's calm presence registered on some level, but Ethan had no desire to indulge in pleasantries. It had been a hectic evening, the dining room was buzzing, and he was behind schedule on refills for a nearby table. Having learned that the only remaining seat was the cramped table by the kitchen doors, Ethan felt a kind of vindictive satisfaction. He reasoned that if a customer arrived late and without a reservation, then being tucked beside the busy kitchen was a fair outcome. Ethan approached with a menu in hand, offering only the faintest hint of courtesy. He walked briskly, weaving among tables where diners laughed and sipped their drinks in blissful ignorance of his foul mood. He led the newcomer to the narrow seat, noticing how it was drenched in the glow of a single overhead lamp that highlighted every swirl of steam from the passing plates. He placed the menu before Keanu with minimal ceremony, signaled that he would return soon to take the order, and spun on his heel. Although Ethan tried to remain composed, a slight smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth. For a few seconds, he entertained the thought that this man might complain about the location, or demand a better seat, or even leave altogether. But the guest simply sat, crossing his hands on the menu, taking in the swirl of the restaurant's ambience with the unruffled composure of someone who had nothing to prove. In the kitchen corridor, Ethan exchanged quick remarks with fellow servers about the new arrival. A coworker, an upbeat waitress named Clara, nudged Ethan in the shoulder and suggested that this could be a special customer. She suspected there was something recognizable in the stranger's expression or the dignified way he carried himself. Ethan dismissively brushed off any such possibility. Perhaps he had grown cynical. Maybe he was simply fatigued. It did not occur to him that this quiet man could be a celebrity of the highest order. After all, what would such an icon be doing here, at a modest establishment in a little Oregon town? As the evening progressed, Keanu sat peacefully, scanning the menu or occasionally glancing around the dining room to observe how families and couples interacted in cheerful, low-lit harmony. From time to time, he pulled out his phone, scrolling through it with an air of discreet interest, as if searching for nothing in particular. Beyond the hushed veil of curious diners, who largely ignored him, a few sets of eyes began to linger. Uncertain whispers floated. Was he simply a tired traveler or someone they had seen on a screen before? Eventually, Ethan returned to take the order. His manner was abrupt, and he inquired about the guests' preferences without a trace of warmth. The hush that settled over that particular corner was palpable. Keanu took it in stride, calmly selecting a hearty soup and a main dish from the limited suggestions Ethan begrudgingly offered. The order was placed, and Ethan retreated, already anticipating an unimpressive tip. In the bustle of the open kitchen, with pots clanging and servers rushing to keep up, a subtle tension hovered around Ethan. He felt a nagging pang that this newcomer was different. Yet he was determined to resist the idea, dismissing Clara's earlier hints. With each passing minute, though, a low-level stir began rippling through the restaurant. A handful of customers, newly aware of the man in the black sweater, leaned toward one another, eyebrows raised in recognition. Smartphone cameras, slyly angled, attempted to capture evidence. Clara walked by Ethan again, whispering excitedly that the man might be a huge star. Ethan responded with a dismissive wave, reasserting his conviction that if someone truly famous were here, the energy in the place would have already turned electric. He rationalized that a big name would typically arrive with an entourage, not alone and unannounced, but Clara refused to abandon her hunch. She reminded Ethan, in gentle and indirect ways, that not all celebrities enjoyed flashy arrivals or demanded over-the-top indulgences. She suggested he take a closer look at the guest's face. Out in the dining room, certain patrons had already figured out the puzzle. They recognized the jawline from action films or the warm, reflective expression from interviews. Yet even as awareness spread, no wild commotion erupted. Some guests, respecting boundaries, chose to observe from afar. Others quietly informed their companions in hushed voices that one of the biggest film stars of modern times was among them. The restaurant hum took on an undercurrent of anticipation, as if something extraordinary were about to unfold. When the soup arrived, Ethan delivered it with a trace of impatience, placing it on the table so hastily that droplets splashed over the rim. The creamy chowder trickled onto the tablecloth, and for an instant it seemed as though the whole room paused to see how the patron would react. Astonishingly, he did not react with outrage or indignation. Instead, he dabbed the spill with a napkin, carrying on with an almost amused detachment. Ethan, uncomfortably aware of his slip, chose not to offer any apology and swiftly retreated to attend another table. Back at the serving station, Clara shook her head. She reminded Ethan that the guest at the corner table showed no hint of annoyance despite the blatant discourtesy. This observation only heightened Ethan's perplexity. He was used to over-demanding customers or self-styled gourmands who believed themselves above small-town servers. The quiet man at table 7, however, radiated something akin to grace. It became increasingly clear to all but Ethan that this was not merely an unassuming stranger. In hushed corridors and side conversations, Staff members tiptoed around the possibility that an A-lister had walked into their everyday world. Some asked each other if they should offer special treatment. Others simply found themselves awed that someone so recognizable could behave with such modesty. Ethan remained unconvinced. His own biases and vexations about the job kept him from entertaining the notion that this mild customer might be Keanu Reeves. Nevertheless, the evidence mounted. One diner discreetly showed a captured photo on a phone to a friend, and they both struggled to hide their excitement. Another group across the restaurant exchanged meaningful glances each time they spotted the man's face. A few recognized him immediately, but decided to respect his apparent desire for a peaceful meal. Then came the main dish, steak, cooked to perfection. Ethan, continuing his near-robotic routine, served it as if fulfilling a rote obligation. He set the plate down once more with minimal courtesy. Still, the man offered a gentle nod of acknowledgement. It was a simple gesture, but something about it radiated empathy. Though no words were spoken, Ethan felt unexpectedly disarmed. He had not earned kindness from this diner, yet there it was, silently extended with no expectations in return. While this interplay unfolded, the rest of the staff found themselves fidgeting with secret excitement. The manager noticed how guests kept glancing at the same corner. The hostess from earlier in the evening replayed her own initial interaction with the traveler, feeling a pang of regret that she had not taken more time to be welcoming. Clara, full of restrained enthusiasm, quietly asked colleagues if they believed it was truly Keanu Reeves. Almost everyone, except Ethan, was increasingly certain. Yet for his part, Ethan dismissed any notion that the unassuming individual could be a major star. Instead, he grumbled to himself that the man likely possessed a sense of entitlement, silently judging the restaurant for every small misstep. The edge in Ethan's demeanor could not hide his fatigue. The last few weeks had been particularly hard for him. Lingering bills, personal obligations, and the weight of monotony that comes from serving plate after plate to travelers who drifted in and out without leaving a mark. Around the time that dinner service began winding down and half the tables were cleared, Ethan felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. A hush swept across certain portions of the dining area. The man at table 7 was finishing his meal, clearly savoring it. A handful of people had started snapping sneaky photos. Some observers wore expressions of silent awe, while others looked eager to confirm their suspicions. A few minutes before the mysterious guest signaled for the check, the manager received a whispered update from a patron who claimed absolute certainty about the identity of the diner. Word traveled swiftly among the staff, and suddenly, the knowledge weighed heavily in the air. A shared sense of disbelief and excitement rippled across the waiters and kitchen staff, forging a momentary bond of wonder. Ethan, retrieving plates from a neighboring table, noticed anxious glances directed at him. He caught bits of talk suggesting that a genuine Hollywood star was present. He also noted how some of his fellow employees were bracing for a wave of recognition that could burst forth at any second. Uncomfortable with the swirl of speculation, Ethan tried to bury himself in routine tasks. Eventually, the moment arrived. Keanu Reeves finished his meal, quietly settled his bill, and prepared to depart. As he stood, the hush in the restaurant became more pronounced. A few families, too in awe to disrupt the peace, simply watched. Others briefly locked eyes with him, acknowledging that they knew who he was, yet wished to respect his space. Without an entourage, cameras, or bodyguards, he carried an air of gentle autonomy, reminding everyone that fame did not have to be loud or imposing. Though some guests felt compelled to greet him, most held back, sensing that it was best to allow him the anonymity he seemed to prefer. In that fleeting interval, the staff stood behind the counter or hovered in the aisle, uncertain whether to approach him with thanks or stand aside. Among them was Ethan, whose skepticism clashed with the rapidly dawning realization that he might have overlooked something monumental. Keanu walked to the door, pausing only to cast a quick glance around the dining area. His gaze landed briefly on Ethan, and there appeared to be a fleeting glimmer of understanding, perhaps a silent, friendly acknowledgement that no harm was done. Then, with a final gentle nod, the man disappeared into the damp Oregon night. A delicate swirl of cold air replaced his presence, and an immediate wave of hushed exclamations spread throughout the room. In that instant, Ethan felt the floor drop from under him. Clara wasted no time in pointing out that Keanu Reeves, an actor renowned for numerous iconic roles, had quietly dined under everyone's noses. Overwhelmed, Ethan joined the staff in revisiting each detail of the evening in his mind. He recalled every moment of his attitude, from the clipped greeting to the spilled soup, all of which added up to a humiliating reflection of his own frustration rather than any failing of the guest. A few minutes after the star departed, a tourist who had been sitting by the window approached Ethan with excited fervor. The patron displayed a phone with a hastily snapped picture, confirming that the visitor was indeed Keanu Reeves. The tourist mentioned being too shy to ask for an autograph, but certain enough to capture a picture from afar. Ethan felt his cheeks grow warm as he remembered all the subtle slights he had inflicted. As the commotion simmered, the manager, Linda, approached Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and reproach in her eyes. She had heard from Clara that Ethan treated the diner with visible impatience. Linda questioned why Ethan acted that way towards someone who had shown no sign of arrogance. Ethan found himself at a loss for words, a spike of guilt blossoming in his chest. In that moment, Ethan was forced to confront his own motives. Over time, dissatisfaction and cynicism had invaded his interactions with customers. He had begun to see travelers and walk-ins as burdens. This perspective had become so ingrained that he rarely offered genuine kindness anymore. The prior evening's fiasco, the memory of chowder spilling on a world-famous actor, suddenly felt like a moral lesson carved by fate. He could not stop replaying the scene in his head, the calm acceptance in Keanu's eyes even as soup sloshed onto the table. This star of countless action flicks, known for his generosity off-screen, had been unassuming enough to choose an out-of-the-way table in a small-town restaurant. He had not demanded special attention or displayed the entitlement Ethan resented in lesser-known patrons. Through it all, Ethan had overlooked the chance to make a positive impression, responding only with his usual bitterness. Throughout the night and into the cleaning shift, employees huddled in corners to speak of the visitor who had just left. Some staff members expressed regret for not offering a more welcoming environment. Others appeared excited that a major celebrity had dined in their midst. Meanwhile, Ethan remained quiet, feeling the sting of shame. He recognized that he had allowed an unexceptional mood and personal worries to overshadow a rare opportunity for genuine human connection. Hours later, as the staff counted receipts and shut off lamps, Linda reminded them that the key lesson from the evening was consistent courtesy, regardless of a person's fame or status. She commended some of them for maintaining their composure and courtesy, while gently but firmly indicating that Ethan's approach needed improvement. There was no direct reprimand, only a quiet disappointment that sank more deeply in Ethan's conscience than any scolding could. That night, as Ethan walked home under the lingering drizzle, each step seemed heavier than the last. The ordinarily tranquil streets of the small Oregon town had never felt so isolating. Street lamps glowed, reflecting their lonely halos in puddles along the sidewalk. He could not shake the memory of Keanu Reeves' almost spiritual composure. If any diner had the right to expect extraordinary service or to voice a complaint, it was him. Yet he had left with a courteous nod and no reproach whatsoever. Ethan tossed and turned in bed, trying to rationalize his behavior. He told himself that he had been tired, overworked, and financially stressed. However, these excuses felt weak in the face of genuine remorse. In a brief moment before sleep claimed him, he admitted silently that he had abandoned the fundamental purpose of hospitality, to provide comfort and kindness. By the next morning, stories of Keanu's visit had spread. A local social media group dedicated to the town's events buzzed with excited chatter. Someone posted a blurry photo of him smiling politely at the table, half-eaten steak in front of him, the soft lights of Riverside Bistro dancing in the background. Comments flowed in about how modest he looked, how he blended in, and how lucky the staff was to have served him. Meanwhile, Ethan woke feeling heavy-hearted. He dreaded returning to the restaurant, suspecting that everyone there would relive the incident. He pictured Clara brandishing an "I told you so" grin, Linda's gentle but incisive observations, and the rest of the staff exchanging nods of reluctant agreement. Each scenario fed the swirl of regrets in his mind. When he eventually arrived at work, the hush among coworkers confirmed his fears. They did not cast direct blame, but their sideways glances and subdued tone implied concern about his state of mind. Clara took him aside, explaining how much it had hurt to see him brush off a polite guest and offer subpar service. The disappointment, she implied, was not because Keanu Reeves was a celebrity, but because it was a missed chance to prove that genuine hospitality could exist anywhere. Ethan found himself replaying his own life circumstances. He thought about the dreams he once nurtured, attending culinary school, opening a cozy cafe, or perhaps developing a signature line of comfort foods that could put places like Riverside Bistro on the map. Over time, these aspirations had eroded under the weight of day-to-day obligations, leading him to resent a job he once considered a stepping stone. As the lunch shift trickled in, Ethan struggled to concentrate. He made an active effort to be kinder to customers, reminding himself that any person at a table could be carrying undisclosed burdens, or might even be a famous figure looking for solace in a hidden corner. This renewed mindfulness triggered small changes in his attitude. He found himself smiling a bit more, asking how patrons were enjoying their meals, and trying to see each interaction as an opportunity for warmth rather than a chore. A day passed, then another. Just when the hype around Keanu's visit began to settle, the restaurant received a call. Linda answered, and her expression shifted from curiosity to excitement. The voice on the other end was not Keanu, but a representative who inquired if the staff would be interested in hosting a private meal for a small group on an unspecified date. The request included a discreet mention that the group might include the actor himself. Linda felt a rush of enthusiasm but maintained composure. She indicated that Riverside Bistro would be honored to accommodate them, explaining that they usually required advanced reservation details. The representative assured her that specifics would be provided soon, emphasizing the need for absolute privacy and no publicity. Linda, feeling both proud and slightly nervous, agreed without hesitation. At this news, Ethan felt a renewed sense of urgency. He saw a slender chance at redemption, a possibility to show he had learned from his missteps. If Keanu returned, Ethan wanted to be ready. He spent the next few days quietly intensifying his knowledge of the menu, memorizing local food sources, and brushing up on the artistry of plating. He sought advice from the head chef, who was initially startled to see such proactive interest from a waiter who had never before shown much passion beyond clocking in and out. Clara, witnessing Ethan's genuine attempts at growth, stopped teasing him. The rest of the team observed him studying meal preparation, aligning silverware meticulously, and double-checking the correct wine pairings for key dishes. Even Linda admitted privately that she was pleased to see a new spark in Ethan's eyes, something that had long been absent. Although no immediate word came about the private event, Ethan continued to refine his demeanor. Sometimes, this effort felt awkward. He caught himself second-guessing everything, from how to greet a table to whether he should refill water glasses more frequently. Yet each incremental step helped rebuild his confidence. Customers responded positively, often leaving kinder remarks and slightly bigger tips. Over time, Ethan rediscovered the satisfaction of providing a good service experience, a far cry from the sarcastic approach that once dominated his shifts. Late one evening, after a busy dinner rush, Ethan lingered in the now quiet restaurant. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, and the chef was long gone. He moved between the wooden tables, reflecting on how each seat held untold stories. He recalled the intangible spark of excitement he once felt when he started working there, the optimism that even a humble job could lead somewhere bigger. That optimism had been buried beneath layers of frustration, But now, with some introspection and a potential second chance on the horizon, it was slowly resurfacing. In the stillness, Ethan recognized that the true essence of hospitality was empathy, not just customer service protocol. It mattered that each patron who walked through the door felt appreciated, no matter their status. And while he regretted that it took a near-mythical moment, serving Keanu Reeves, to reignite that insight, he chose to accept the lesson as an opportunity to grow. Days continued to pass, and the staff resumed their typical routines, occasionally speculating about whether the private reservation would ever materialize. Ethan tried to temper his hopes, telling himself that even if Keanu never returned, the meaningful shift in his attitude was worth it. He found small joys, like recommending a dish to a traveling couple who raved about it, or guiding a family toward the perfect dessert for a child's birthday celebration. Subtle transformations in his approach, and a heightened sense of pride in his work turned each night into less of an ordeal and more of a platform for personal growth. However, life retained its share of challenges for Ethan. Bills still arrived with uncomfortable regularity, and there were personal issues he had not fully resolved. Yet he moved through each day with a nascent resilience, determined to carry forward the humility he had discovered in the wake of that famous encounter. On an otherwise ordinary afternoon, the phone at the hostess stand rang. Linda answered, and her face lit up in quiet triumph. She shared the news that the private meal was confirmed for the following week, an intimate dinner for three, one of whom was the very man who had triggered Ethan's personal reckoning. The day and time were arranged, and Linda immediately placed a small circle around the chosen table on the seating chart. Without being asked, Ethan volunteered to serve that section. He did so calmly, without the bravado or desperation one might expect. He simply expressed that he would be honored to host the table and make amends for any earlier missteps. Linda approved, clarifying that the star's representative had requested a discreet environment and minimal fanfare. This time, no one would be caught off guard. When the anticipated evening arrived, the staff prepared meticulously. The floors were polished, fresh flowers were placed on each table, and the entire ambience exuded a warmth reminiscent of a special occasion. Ethan took extra care, from pressing his uniform to rehearsing how he would greet the guests. He understood that the best approach was genuine hospitality, not an obsequious performance. As the hour neared, the rain returned, light but persistent. The patter on the windows conjured memories of the night Keanu first appeared. A hush descended whenever the front door opened, staff members pausing to see if it was him, only to return to their tasks when it proved to be someone else. Eventually, the door swung wide, letting a gust of damp air into the foyer. Keanu Reeves stepped inside once more. This time, a different energy marked his arrival. The hostess greeted him with a friendly, direct welcome, prepared to lead him to the specially reserved table. He was joined by two acquaintances, both of whom radiated a similar easygoing charm. Even though people recognized him instantly, there was no scramble or commotion, just a gentle wave of respect that rippled across the restaurant. Ethan approached with measured composure, meeting Keanu's gaze with a nod that contained both acknowledgement and humility. Keanu's expression was genial, and if he remembered Ethan's earlier attitude, there was no reproach in his eyes. The actor settled at the table, looking around at the comfortably lit interior, as if revisiting an old memory. Ethan provided menus, introduced the specials, and made thoughtful suggestions, all without the forced politeness that had once marred their initial interaction. Inside, Ethan felt his heart hammering, but he focused on embodying what he had learned in the weeks since their first encounter. He remained nearby yet respectful of the group's privacy, gliding in and out with glasses of water, wine, and carefully presented appetizers. He sensed a subtle nod of approval from Keanu whenever their eyes met, as though the actor recognized the sincere effort. No words of apology were spoken. None were needed. In the quiet moments of service, there was an unspoken understanding that second chances need not be overshadowed by old errors. The hush in that corner of the restaurant was laden with possibility and mutual respect. Ethan guided the group through the courses, ensuring that each dish arrived at the peak of freshness. He even shared small insights about locally sourced ingredients, showcasing not only what the region had to offer, but also how much he had grown to appreciate and understand the craft. The meal stretched out enjoyably, unhurried, and the mood at the table seemed relaxed. While the rest of the restaurant continued its regular rhythm, families discussing the day's events, couples clinking wine glasses, an air of subdued wonder pervaded the staff who recalled the tension and revelations from the previous visit. Clara observed from a distance, occasionally throwing Ethan encouraging looks. Linda remained in the background, silently taking pride in her team's newfound confidence. By the time dessert was served, Ethan could sense that he had, in his own humble way, redeemed himself. He recognized that fame was not the deciding factor. It was about making every patron feel genuinely welcomed. In the midst of plates filled with molten chocolate cake and fresh fruit tarts, the conversation at the private table remained soft and contemplative. Although Ethan caught only the ambience rather than the exact words, he sensed that much of what was exchanged there concerned gratitude and gentle reflection on the fleeting nature of life's small moments. When the group finally prepared to leave, Keanu offered a slight smile in Ethan's direction. There was no direct statement of forgiveness or thanks. Instead, the actor's calm expression conveyed a quiet admiration for the sincerity that Ethan had shown all evening. Ethan acknowledged it with a subtle bow of his head, mindful that this was a pivotal juncture not just in his night, but perhaps in his trajectory as a person. After they departed, the restaurant resumed its ordinary bustle, but an undercurrent of positivity lingered. Ethan gathered the check from the table, nodding a generous tip alongside a short message scrawled on a discreet piece of paper. The words were succinct, an affirmation of sorts, indicating that perseverance and genuine care could transform even the most routine interactions. Clara caught sight of Ethan pausing, reading the note multiple times before folding it carefully into his apron pocket. She did not interrupt. She recognized that sometimes a moment of private reflection was the greatest reward. That note, and everything it represented, would rest in Ethan's mind as a testament to how one's approach to life could shift from cynicism to hope. In the kitchen, the head chef inquired about how the service had gone, and Ethan expressed relief and satisfaction. He was more animated than usual, describing how he had guided the guests through the menu and ensured each plate was impeccably presented. For the first time in ages, his passion for hospitality and food gleamed through his words. Linda gave Ethan an approving look as she finished confirming the night's receipts. She did not explicitly mention the significance of the successful second chance, but he sensed her pride. The rest of the staff, buoyed by the knowledge that their small-town restaurant was capable of hosting such a prominent figure more than once, glowed with collective confidence. Finally, as closing time approached, Ethan stood near the spot where the private table had been set, reflecting on how events had evolved. He thought back to the night he had nearly sullied everything with his impatience, and how Keanu Reeves had shown only understanding in return. Rather than resist that moment of realization, Ethan had harnessed it to become better at his job and, in a subtle but meaningful way, better at being present for others. It was at that exact juncture that Ethan realized he had reached the end of one chapter of this unfolding journey. He locked up the restaurant with a mind far less burdened than before. The illusions that had once anchored him to negativity had lifted. Though challenges remained, financial strains, personal uncertainties, he now had a clear blueprint to greet adversity with the same resilience and grace that Keanu had demonstrated under far more public scrutiny. You felt that, didn't you? That was no ordinary moment. If it hit you, hit like and let's keep going. This was the first half of the story, culminating in a quiet sense of renewal. It revealed the rift between cynicism and humility, reminding Ethan that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected places. As the rain continued outside, and the last glimmer of warmth vanished from the restaurant windows, Ethan felt certain that what had transpired was more than a fleeting encounter. It was the start of something transformative, opening a path toward redemption, self-discovery, and the possibility that one small-town waiter could reimagine his own future by simply embracing genuine kindness. Keanu Reeves had not left the evening at Riverside Bistro behind, nor had he overlooked the quiet transformation unfolding within the small-town waiter who had once met him with stilted courtesy. In the weeks following that hushed second visit, he maintained a thoughtful watch on Ethan's progress from a distance, convinced that the renewed spark he saw in the young man could be nurtured into something far brighter. Yet Keanu's life rarely allowed for idle observation. His commitments were many and varied, spread across filming schedules, philanthropic engagements, and creative projects that demanded both artistic vision and personal humility. His admiration for genuine human stories had guided him for years toward producing smaller-scale documentaries, collaborating with local artists, and helping voices that might otherwise go unheard. He saw in Ethan the embodiment of one such story, someone at a crucial fork in the road, newly energized and armed with the possibility of transformation. This notion stayed with Keanu, quietly urging him to create the right moment for Ethan to join him in a broader undertaking. A chance arose when Keanu devoted himself to a heartfelt documentary about overcoming personal obstacles. The production required an array of interviews and on-location segments throughout the West Coast, spotlighting individuals whose lives had changed course after a single, unexpected event. The premise echoed Ethan's experience, and Keanu became convinced that Ethan's perspective would lend sincerity to the project. Through a discreet liaison, he managed to extend a formal invitation, an opportunity for Ethan to spend time traveling with the film crew, learning from industry professionals, and adding personal insights that could ground the documentary in real, hard-earned experience. Ethan, upon receiving this invitation, felt an immediate surge of both exhilaration and dread. Until that point, he had labored under the weight of uncertainty, hoping that his newfound dedication at Riverside Bistro would open new paths, but never dreaming that they would emerge so clearly or so soon. He quietly arranged to take an extended leave from his restaurant work. Although Linda needed his help, she understood the magnitude of the offer. She encouraged him with a kind of motherly pride, noting that people seldom found themselves offered such a direct route to life-changing possibilities. Despite lingering hesitations about uprooting himself, Ethan packed a modest suitcase and prepared to meet the documentary team in Portland. On an overcast morning, he arrived at a small production office in the city's downtown district, expecting to meet only the assistant who had contacted him. Instead, he discovered a small, tight-knit ensemble of filmmakers awaiting his arrival. They introduced themselves one after another, describing how Keanu, though not physically present that day, had personally ensured Ethan would be integrated into the project. Each member of the crew spoke warmly of how important it was to capture diverse viewpoints, not just the polished statements of those who already lived extraordinary lives. They believed that hearing from someone who had served tables in a humble restaurant could illuminate how quickly and quietly a life can pivot when one decides to embrace change. Initially, Ethan felt overwhelmed by the flurry of technical jargon, scheduling demands, and location shoots. The producers offered an informal orientation, walking him through a maze of lights, editing software, and storyboards scattered around the space. They explained that the film's focus was to illustrate how hope could emerge from simple, real-life encounters. They had scoured multiple towns and communities to find individuals willing to share experiences of adversity and perseverance. For them, Ethan represented the vantage of someone who had been stuck in a mundane cycle until a single event, or person, pushed him toward reevaluating everything. During his first few days on the production, Ethan rarely spoke more than a few sentences at a time. He mostly observed, trying to decode the rhythms of a small documentary team. He saw the camera operators adjusting angles to capture fleeting, genuine expressions. He watched the story editors sifting through interview transcripts to distill emotional truths. He studied the quiet confidence of the field producers who arranged each shoot, ensuring that interviews flowed without aggression or sensationalism. Ethan also sensed Keanu's presence in every corner of the production, even when the actor was not physically there. Through video calls or short messages, Keanu guided the crew's approach, emphasizing the respect he wished to extend to interviewees and the authenticity he sought in the storytelling. Production members often recounted how Keanu, despite his stature in the industry, refused to overshadow the film's subjects. He wanted them to shine on their own, unhindered by cameras or celebrity glare. That humility reinforced Ethan's impression that he was not simply working on another commercial project. He was stepping into a creative environment that reflected the values that had so impressed him back at Riverside Bistro. Eventually, Keanu flew in from Los Angeles to join the group in Oregon, where the team had scheduled visits with several local residents. Ethan awaited his arrival with an odd mixture of excitement and gratitude. He remembered all too well the nights when he had trudged through his shifts, never imagining that the man he spoke to so rudely could become such a catalyst in his life. They reunited in a modest conference room at the production office, greeting one another with a warmth that came from mutual respect. Without speaking in direct quotes or grand gestures, they acknowledged how far Ethan had come from that night in the restaurant and how critical he would be to the rest of the film's journey. From that point, the documentary schedule dictated their collective movement. The team journeyed across Oregon, stopping in small towns and occasionally venturing into the outskirts of Washington and Northern California. Keanu and Ethan spent hours in cramped vans or temporary trailers, discussing the intangible thread that binds seemingly isolated stories into a shared narrative of human endurance. Keanu remained the guiding figure, gently drawing out Ethan's reflections on each interview, encouraging him to press deeper into his own vulnerabilities so that he could relate more meaningfully to those they filmed. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan found himself increasingly at ease in Keanu's company. He noticed the actor's unassuming habits, his preference for reading quietly at dawn, his dedication to an early morning stretch routine, and his gentle courtesy toward hotel employees and local volunteers. There was never any trace of impatience when equipment failures delayed a shoot or when last-minute changes rearranged the schedule. Keanu simply adapted, responding with calm, reasoned guidance. Over time, the crew absorbed that same approach, seeing how productive calmness proved to be. One pivotal phase of filming took place in a rustic coastal town, where a local fisherman had endured a near-fatal accident. The man had lost half his crew in a storm, saved only by the unwavering determination of a small rescue team. The documentary aimed to capture not merely the tragedy, but the fisherman's decision to remain at sea and continue his life's work against all odds. Ethan participated in the on-site interviews, handing over small lists of questions and observing with empathy as the fisherman recounted his trauma and subsequent healing process. Though the setting, an old wharf battered by swirling ocean winds, felt distant from the candle-lit hush of Riverside Bistro, Ethan sensed the universal chord of transformation. Over and over, people who had stared down adversity described the way an unexpected moment forced them to reevaluate their priorities and their sense of self. Ethan remained quietly moved by each new story, relating it to his own night of epiphany. Meanwhile, Keanu shifted among cameras, lighting reflectors and soggy planks of the dock, doing everything he could to make the environment conducive to open, natural storytelling. Ethan admired the precision with which Keanu balanced compassion with artistic discipline. In the wake of that coastal trip, the group ventured inland, seeking out ranchers, teachers, and single parents, each with their own account of perseverance. The documentary filmed in barns, in small diners, in community centers, anywhere that people felt safe sharing their hopes and disappointments. Ethan occasionally stepped forward to share a piece of his own story, summarizing how he had once been trapped in negative routines, only to find himself awakened by kindness. His modest perspective offered the interviewees a sense of camaraderie. It reminded them that even someone who seemed like an outsider, arriving with cameras and professional gear, had faced relatable struggles. All the while, Keanu maintained a quietly pivotal role. He arranged late-night brainstorming sessions where the crew sifted through hours of footage, deciding how best to weave the individual narratives into a cohesive film. He encouraged Ethan to discuss the significance of small-town life, the nuances of service work, and the reality of how easy it was to lose empathy when dealing with daily pressures. Without fanfare, Keanu guided Ethan toward a deeper understanding of documentary work, demonstrating how visual composition and thoughtful editing could both illuminate and respect the humanity of a story. As summer progressed, the production schedule led everyone southward toward the outskirts of Los Angeles, where additional interviews awaited. Ethan found himself in the vast sprawl of a metropolis he had never visited before, entranced by the swirl of highways, neon signs, and endless rows of storefronts. The environment felt strikingly different from the understated streets of his hometown, yet a growing confidence allowed him to accept the change without overwhelming anxiety. In Los Angeles, the documentary team based themselves in a repurposed warehouse that contained a small post-production studio. This place served as a nerve center, with multiple editing stations, audio equipment, and a lounge area used for informal strategy sessions. Keanu spent significant time here, overseeing the shaping of the film, inviting Ethan to watch the editorial staff piece together separate interviews with musical interludes and scenic footage. Ethan observed how seemingly inconsequential moments, someone's timid pause, a single tear of recollection, could become powerful reflections of resilience when edited with respect and nuance. During these sessions, Ethan noticed that Keanu exuded a soft but tangible sense of guardianship over the film's core message. He never once imposed himself as the central figure. If anything, he appeared determined that the documentary highlight ordinary people grappling with extraordinary circumstances. Whenever an interviewer or editor suggested a dramatic flourish to amplify the actor's involvement, Keanu politely steered them back to the focus on everyday heroes. That willingness to recede into the background deepened Ethan's admiration, reminding him that leadership often manifested through restraint rather than dominance. On occasion, philanthropic commitments called Keanu away from the studio. He would vanish for a day, sometimes crossing the country to support a charitable cause, but he always returned with renewed purpose. Ethan sometimes accompanied him on these short sojourns, witnessing how Keanu's celebrity could mobilize donations or rally support for struggling communities. Despite the spotlight that inevitably accompanied any public appearance, Keanu moved through these events with the same measured grace he displayed in private moments. If reporters tried to shift attention onto him, he tactfully redirected the conversation to the cause, highlighting the real people in need. Meanwhile, Ethan adapted to a new daily rhythm. He no longer relied on the rote tasks of waiting tables, but rather devoted himself to the intangible labor of collaborative storytelling. He often felt tired at the end of each day, though it was a fatigue rooted in inspiration rather than drudgery. He also found that, for the first time in his adult life, he could imagine a future broader than the walls of Riverside Bistro. The documentary might not lead him toward fame or fortune, but it had awakened an eagerness to connect with others, to listen intently, and to make some small contribution to the world beyond his own personal constraints. When the film entered its final phase of post-production, the entire group convened for a marathon of editing sessions. Days blurred into nights, and the clack of computer keys underscored the mosaic of voices layered within the footage. Ethan assisted by compiling notes, marking timestamps for crucial testimonies, and offering feedback whenever asked. He noticed how certain passages made him recall the hush of the Oregon rain outside the bistro, that intimately quiet place where his own perspective once felt so confined. Keanu remained a steady figure through it all. He roved from station to station, pausing to compliment an editor's creative choice or to suggest a gentler visual transition. His attention to detail revealed a love for the craft that went far beyond any star-driven glamour. By now, the entire team, ranging from the youngest production assistant to the seasoned cinematographer, had grown comfortable in his presence, no longer starstruck but genuinely appreciative of the leadership he provided. And amid this thrumming hive of activity, Ethan continued to learn, each day stepping more firmly into a sense of purpose he had never imagined possible. At last, the documentary neared its completion. The final cut assembled the personal stories of fishermen, farmers, teachers, single parents, and others who had navigated heartbreak and triumph. The narrative underscored that a single spark of empathy could change everything. Though Keanu's involvement was recognized, his voice guided the transitions between segments. He stood aside so that the film's subjects emerged as the true protagonists. In those carefully sequenced stories, Ethan spotted reflections of his own journey, subtle shifts of outlook, small decisions that gradually became life-altering, moments when a stranger's kindness suddenly redirected someone's entire path. When the time came to unveil the documentary, a small premiere was arranged at an independent theater near downtown Los Angeles. The evening represented the culmination of months of filming and editing, yet it also provided a rare moment of celebration. Ethan and the rest of the production team assembled in the lobby, greeting guests whose support or insights had played a role in shaping the film. Keanu arrived quietly, refusing any fuss or grand entrance. He greeted each crew member with understated gratitude, aware that none of it could have come together without their collective dedication. The lights dimmed, and the documentary began to roll before an audience composed of interview subjects, philanthropic partners, and a few curious locals drawn by the chance to see a new Keanu Reeves project. Ethan sat toward the back, unconsciously gripping the arms of his seat as he watched the flickering images. The first stories emerged in crisp detail, accompanied by a gently evocative score. He saw the fisherman describing the fateful storm, the teacher recounting the moment she realized she could change young lives by teaching beyond the usual curriculum, and countless others who had contributed their voices. Each narrative flowed into the next, revealing a mosaic of resilience and hope. Ethan felt his eyes begin to sting with tears, seeing how these stories, so different from his own, mirrored the same willingness to embrace unexpected paths. He also recognized how seamlessly the film had woven the quiet perspective he had provided from behind the camera, proof that even an ex-waiter could participate in telling someone else's story with honesty. Near the end, the documentary paused on a montage of fleeting images: diners, lonely highways, the glow of a small-town restaurant sign in the rain. The audience observed the delicate interplay of everyday settings, a reminder that even the most ordinary corners of life could hold a spark that changed everything. When the screen finally faded to black and the credits began their crawl, there was a hush that spoke of deep introspection. The applause that broke that hush felt genuine, punctuated by soft sighs and murmured words of praise. Keanu stood quietly near a side entrance, acknowledging the applause but gesturing for others, editors, cinematographers, local heroes, to step forward. Eventually, Ethan joined them, standing awkwardly at first, until a wave of warmth from the crowd encouraged him to accept the moment. Following the premiere, Ethan found himself fielding respectful questions from a few onlookers. They asked how he had become involved, and he briefly described his background in Riverside Bistro. He recounted the night he first served Keanu with minimal grace, the subsequent wave of realization, and the steps that led him to become part of this documentary effort. He could see how people found comfort in learning that his transformation had not hinged on any supernatural twist, but on a simple willingness to open his heart in the wake of a stranger's kindness. Keanu lingered on the fringes of these conversations, occasionally sharing a knowing glance with Ethan. Neither needed to address the original soup mishap or the frustration that once defined Ethan's attitude. They both seemed content to let the entire arc speak for itself, as if the documentary represented not just a film, but a living testament to how quickly horizons could expand. Before long, talk of distributing the documentary beyond the Los Angeles screening arose. Independent film festivals beckoned, and philanthropic organizations hoped to use the documentary for fundraising events. Keanu and the production team began to sketch out a plan for traveling showcases, each offering a Q&A session that would allow everyday people to ask how these stories might apply to their own lives. Ethan, somewhat stunned, received an invitation to join these showings as a panel participant, tasked with sharing his experiences on camera, in kitchens, and at the threshold of personal reinvention. Though the proposition thrilled him, Ethan felt a quiet pull to return briefly to Riverside Bistro. He had not stepped inside that restaurant since leaving for the documentary. He yearned to see Linda, Clara, and the others who might wonder what had come of his journey. He also needed to remind himself of where he had been, both physically and emotionally, to truly appreciate how far he had come. When Keanu learned of this plan, he encouraged it, suggesting that there was no better way to measure growth than by facing the place that once felt like a cage. On a crisp afternoon, Ethan drove along the familiar highway back into his hometown. He passed the same landmarks he had once taken for granted: the sleepy neighborhoods, the old gas station, and the vintage hardware store plastered with old posters. The streets appeared simultaneously unchanged and wholly different, as if every detail now gleamed in sharper focus. He parked a short distance away from the bistro and walked the rest of the way, taking his time to breathe in the cool air and to recollect the weight he used to carry in these same surroundings. When he stepped through the door, he noticed how the interior still held that gentle scent of roasted garlic and bread, although there were subtle differences. Fresh paint on the window frames, a couple of new photographs on the wall, perhaps a new arrangement of tables near the far corner. Linda, busy folding napkins behind the hostess station, registered his presence with a wide smile. She approached without ceremony, offering a warm greeting and asking how Los Angeles had treated him. He explained with humble gratitude the scope of changes in his life, how the documentary had concluded filming, and how a series of screenings would soon begin. Clara appeared soon after, letting out a burst of excitement that broke the hush of the dining room. She teased him about leaving and returning with an entirely new aura, though her genuine pride peeked through every word. The other staff members, some new hires, listened with curiosity, trying to connect the enthusiastic figure before them with the stories they had heard of a once jaded waiter. In the subtle glances of recognition, Ethan felt a new sense of belonging, as though his path away from Riverside Bistro had, in fact, enriched his place within it. He made his way around the restaurant, greeting a few diners who wondered if they had met him before. He recalled nights when he wore the same apron for hours, burning with resentment over tips too small to cover his bills. Now, the environment felt transformed by his own new perspective. Although many aspects remained unchanged, the swirl of conversation, the shuffle of plates, the intangible difference was in the way Ethan perceived the space as a possible platform for small acts of grace. In a quiet moment, Linda pulled him aside, asking about Keanu and whether Ethan felt the same sense of potential in his new work that he had once yearned for. He acknowledged that the documentary had opened his eyes not just to storytelling, but also to a world in which empathy could drive significant creative endeavors. He felt the same fascination he once had for cooking, but directed toward capturing and amplifying the experiences of others. He planned in the coming months to explore more about film production, perhaps even sign up for classes in editing or narrative structure to deepen his skill set. While they spoke, the main door swung open. A few customers arrived, prompting Linda to address hostess duties, but also granting Ethan a fresh lens on the hustle of dinner prep. He observed the staff scurrying between tables, checking on beverages, consoling a fussy toddler, and ensuring that the kitchen stayed in sync. This was a world he knew intimately, and yet it no longer felt restrictive. It felt like a reminder that even the most familiar setting could hold unseen potential if approached with a mindset of curiosity and respect. Ethan decided to stay for dinner, quietly taking a seat near the back, the same area he once dreaded showing guests because of its proximity to the kitchen. He savored a home-style meal prepared by the chef, relishing the realization that, in his absence, Riverside Bistro had continued to thrive. As he ate, he thought about how this place no longer symbolized entrapment. Instead, it marked the beginning of a story that had since opened into new horizons. The following day, Ethan bid farewell to his hometown once again, driving out of town with a lighter heart. He had no illusions about the difficulties that lay ahead. There would be many challenges in the film industry: financial constraints, unpredictable schedules, and the emotional toll of chronicling other people's suffering. Yet he had discovered a new anchor in the calm sincerity he had learned from Keanu. In that anchor, he found the confidence to keep moving forward, trusting that each small step could lead to a transformative leap. Less than a week later, he reunited with Keanu and the production team in a bustling city for the documentary's first festival showing. The gathering took place in a historical theater known for spotlighting independent films and social justice projects. Despite his excitement, Ethan felt a wave of nerves, knowing that a new audience, full of film critics, local activists, and curious onlookers, would be experiencing their work for the first time. He steeled himself for any skepticism, recalling that real growth always risked vulnerability in public. Before the screening, Keanu gathered the team for a brief moment of collective focus. Without using any grand speeches, he shared his simple hope that the documentary would encourage every viewer to see the hidden possibilities in everyday encounters. He wanted the film to act as an invitation for people to slow down, pay closer attention, and maybe even show a little more kindness than they did yesterday. Ethan recognized this sentiment as the through line that had joined their stories from the start: the power of small gestures to change a single life and thereby alter countless others. When the film rolled once more, Ethan observed it through the lens of an almost nostalgic familiarity. He had witnessed much of the footage dozens of times by that point, and yet, in the presence of a fresh crowd, the stories took on renewed life. Tension built in the auditorium as viewers listened to personal testimonies of heartbreak, resilience, and surprising turns of fate. Small gasps and murmurs indicated moments when the audience discovered a sense of kinship with the film's subjects. By the time the credits arrived, the hush was profound, filled with quiet wonder and empathy. A wave of applause followed, interspersed with subdued tears and hopeful smiles. Festival organizers took to the stage, inviting Keanu, Ethan, and other key members of the team to step forward for a cue. And the lights came up, revealing an audience more diverse than Ethan had expected. From college students to gray-haired community leaders, all drawn to the message embedded in the documentary. Together, the production group fielded inquiries about everything from budget constraints to editorial decisions. Ethan, speaking slowly to ensure clarity, described the emotional resonance of hearing so many stories that mirrored his own realization about the power of a single moment. He explained that, in capturing real people's struggles, the team had to walk a delicate line between empathy and intrusion. In describing the night he first encountered Keanu at Riverside Bistro, he softened his account to avoid any self-pity. Instead, he emphasized that it was a perfect illustration of how even a small exchange, mishandled or otherwise, could prompt an unexpected reckoning. His words found receptive ears, sparking questions about the synergy between humility, second chances, and creative collaboration. Observing the exchange, Keanu offered a slight nod of encouragement. It was the same nod Ethan remembered from that memorable second visit to the restaurant, an affirmation that growth remained possible wherever sincerity took root. Afterward, as the crowd milled about, some wanted selfies with Keanu, while others approached Ethan to express how they related to his story of feeling stuck. He listened attentively, mindful of how easy it could be for people to overlook their own capacity for reinvention. Over time, further invitations to smaller film festivals emerged, along with requests from community organizations wishing to host screenings. The documentary gained traction, propelled partly by Keanu's celebrity, but mostly by the authenticity of the stories captured. At each event, Ethan's role crystallized. He became something of an ambassador for everyday people who yearned to break out of stagnation. His presence helped anchor the film's themes, reminding viewers that life-changing experiences did not belong solely to those facing dramatic catastrophes, but could manifest in the quieter corners of the daily routine, like a restaurant table near the kitchen doors. As the final round of the festival circuit drew to a close, the documentary settled into a comfortable reputation for blending star power with real-life narratives. Keanu prepared to return to other film commitments, but his bond with Ethan remained intact. There were numerous ways to remain connected: occasional virtual calls, short collaborative side projects, and a mutual desire to champion stories that might otherwise go unheard. For Ethan, the conclusion of this documentary journey felt less like an end than a natural transition, a stepping stone to further growth. He reflected on how a single, unremarkable Friday night shift had planted the seeds of radical change. The arc of that experience now felt complete, encompassing the initial friction, the slow thaw, and the ultimate collaboration in an endeavor that reached people across regions. Yet he sensed new horizons opening, a sense of possibility that extended beyond documentary filmmaking. Perhaps he would eventually combine his culinary interests with storytelling, or he might explore other mediums. Whatever the future held, he no longer lived under the cloud of cynicism that once cramped his worldview. The final days of post-premiere obligations passed, and eventually, the production team disbanded to pursue new projects or well-deserved downtime. Keanu expressed appreciation for the entire crew, acknowledging that their willingness to treat each story with care had brought the documentary to life. Although no grand ceremonies took place, there was a quiet shared pride in having contributed to something that resonated with so many viewers. For Ethan, the last scene in this chapter of his life played out in a modest studio apartment in Los Angeles, a space he had rented for the duration of his involvement with the film. There, in the dim light of an early morning, he finished boxing up a few items from the desk he had used for story research. He paused to read a handwritten note from the film's editor, thanking him for the heartfelt insights he provided throughout the creative process. He carefully set the note aside, reflecting on the improbable chain of events that led him to this place. He recalled the exact moment he had spilled soup on Keanu, and the pang of annoyance he felt at having to serve someone who showed up late without a reservation. He thought of that second dinner, in which he learned that a genuine apology could start to mend a significant breach. And he remembered the fervor with which he had studied the documentary process, absorbing lessons on empathy and narrative craft as though they were the only nourishment he needed. The memory of Riverside Bistro no longer carried any sense of regret. Instead, Ethan recognized it as the birthplace of hope, a place where his life trajectory bent toward a new, more expansive horizon. With that final thought, he sealed the box and prepared to step out into the next unknown, confident that whatever shape it took, he would carry forward the calm, unwavering spirit that Keanu Reeves had exemplified all along. And so, the story found its conclusion not in any dramatic triumph or glittering stage, but in the simple resolve of a man once bound by frustration, now set free by understanding. Ethan had witnessed firsthand that the smallest shifts in how one treats another can catalyze profound change. He no longer doubted that a single encounter could alter the course of a life, for he had lived it. And in carrying that knowledge forward, he honored both the quiet man in a black sweater and the enduring promise that even the most ordinary among us can embrace transformation when empathy paves the way. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing tale. And don't forget, we'll have many more uplifting and dramatic stories coming your way. So make sure you subscribe to our channel. That way you'll never miss our newest uploads.